Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kyoto Bowl fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, we are just a couple of weeks away from training camp. That in itself is pretty exciting, but I got thinking about what the offseason is, to me at least, especially as a content creator. This is the prologue of the season. We are looking for setup. We are looking for the table to be set, for the narratives that we could be following in the upcoming year. And one that actually kind of stood out this morning, I was scrolling through some of my, favorite, Chargers beat writer sites, one of the favorites being Chargers Wire, and they had this just simple list of Chargers that would be a free agent after this year. And honestly, guys, it was kind of staggering to think of how many players were on that list. A staggering 11 players could be playing their last season with the Chargers this year. And these aren't just, scrub players. These are actually pretty good players. And this is actually kind of, opening up the conversations to what Tom Telesco is going to do, especially with the Chargers' financial situation going into 2024. Guys, look at this. If you guys are looking for a perfect time to panic, now is the time. We are $60 million over the cap. Of course, the Chargers are going to figure that out. There's going to be some cuts, et cetera, but it does just add another wrench into the situation as to some of these guys being able to even be afforded or not. So 11 players on the cusp of playing maybe their last season this year. We're going to go through all of them, and I'm going to give you guys my opinion whether or not I think they stay with the Chargers beyond this year. Again, there's some pretty big names on here that we're going to have to discuss. You guys, as we're going through that, you can follow along. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys feel one way or another about the player. Should be a pretty interesting one. Before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to join the best fantasy platform on the web, use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. Get in the action, and it's a great way to help support the channel as well. Before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification. Helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action. Last Chance Chargers, a final bolted year. I think that's a good title, right? You guys see Last Chance U? Anyway, okay, let's jump right into it. Last Chance Chargers. These 11 players on their last year in terms of contract with the Bolts. And honestly, again, it's quite a few roles that the Chargers are going to have to fill next season. Look for talent maybe in the draft for next season. And the first one I do want to talk about is tight end Gerald Everett, who I think a lot of us have come to appreciate as a very, very good floor tight end, in my opinion. Of course, he's not going to be a superstar like, our division mate in Travis Kelce. He's not going to be this, huge presence. Maybe likely in the pass game. Who knows? Maybe he can, surprise us all this upcoming season and turn into that player. But for the most part, what I see in a Gerald Everett is a very reliable, consistent floor tight end, which basically to me means that he's going to get the job done, right? Nothing too flashy, but he's going to go out there, blue collar kind of guy, really get things done out there. And to me, I think that's what the Chargers were kind of looking for in the position since moving on from Hunter Henry. Of course, we went out there and got Jared Cook, who was very good, especially in his late age. And then we go turn around and get a Gerald Everett, very comparable player there. Of course, a lot younger, which does open up the door for the Chargers to perhaps extend him. But unfortunately, I do think the Chargers might be targeting this position next year. Of course, they've been looking at upgrading every other part of the offense over the course of the last couple of seasons, starting, in my opinion, with the offensive line, then moving to the receivers, of course, the quarterback as well. Feels like everything's kind of been touched up on outside of tight end. I think tight end may end up being the position the Chargers look for, especially in the draft next season. Guys, remember this last season, how I was all like freaking out, like, dudes, the depth that we're seeing and the tight end position with these rookies coming in, it's absolutely legendary. It's insane. We're all, shouting to the rooftops for Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer. This season, or I should say this upcoming season, could actually surprisingly, mind-blowingly, maybe even look better in terms of, I would say, some of the top tier talent Okay, I don't know if it's going to have as much depth. I think there's going to be certainly some good ones. But some of the top shelf talent in next season's draft at tight end, guys, is absolutely ridiculous. Brock Bowers, you guys know this guy out of Georgia. Like, this dude could actually edge out Kyle Pitts as the best tight end prospect we have ever seen coming into the draft. Edging out Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts, still, his ceiling is sky high depending on how the Falcons shape themselves in the next couple of seasons. Outside of that, you got quite a few players that should be able to contend for first round contention, which I think the Chargers would be wise to at least think about. But even beyond that, the first 3 rounds I think are going to provide some solid options for the Chargers in the draft. And that does kind of put their situation with Gerald Everett in a bit of a tight, especially with the tight budget. It's not going to look like, to me at least, that they're going to be bringing him back. So I'll make my prediction at the end of every one of these segments here. I'm going to say the Chargers probably let Gerald Everett walk. And again, it's not because I don't think he wouldn't be a good fit with the Chargers going forward. I absolutely think he would, but we have to really let this play a factor here, all right? Over the cap, $60 million. We are going to talk about that in a future video, I promise. I know that it seems staggering, but the Chargers will figure that out. There's going to be some sacrifices that have to be made, but one of those sacrifices may be, do we keep talent like, let's say, Gerald Everett, on the roster when we could go out there and draft one in a year where tight end, once again, is looking very good with the rookies coming in. So Gerald Everett, unfortunately, I'll say walk, but again, if the Chargers can swing it, I definitely wouldn't be upset about it. Next up, let's talk about the Chargers' former first-round pick from several seasons back now in Kenneth Murray. I think a lot of Chargers fans kind of know where I stand on this, and it's very unfortunate because I do like Kenneth Murray. I think he's a great person from what I've heard in terms of his locker room presence. It seems like a very hard worker, but at the same time, I don't know if it was ever really the right fit. It just feels like maybe back when he was drafted in 2020, Anthony Lynn maybe had a different vision for him, and then we step into the Brandon Staley era, and there's just not the skill set that we're looking for at inside linebacker that the Chargers can maybe utilize going forward. Of course, it feels like the NFL as a whole is moving towards asking the inside linebacker position to cover a lot more, do a lot more things in terms of their flexibility, almost playing like, safety hybrids out there. They have to really kind of do everything. And unfortunately for Kenneth Murray, I feel like that skill set in coverage never really blossomed. I feel like we saw flashes here and there, but the consistency was just never there. And on top of that, you kind of take a look at the Chargers narrative at the position right now, bringing in, Eric Kendricks. They went out there and likely drafted Kenneth Murray's replacement in Dan Henley. It feels like they're setting themselves up for their identity in the future for that position, if that makes sense. Middle linebacker for the Chargers in 2024 and beyond feels like they're going to be trying to get guys with traits and pass coverage a lot more likely than not. And again, Murray just kind of never lived up to that. The Chargers asked him to do a lot of things that we knew that he wasn't great at in college. And so maybe it is the Chargers and not Brandon Staley, but Anthony Lynn and Tom Telesco shooting themselves in the foot there. I certainly hope Kenneth Murray can figure it out this season and maybe, print out himself a new, destiny with the Chargers. But after letting go of Drew Tranquill and Kaiser White, I just don't see the Chargers bringing him back at that position. So we're going to go ahead and make a prediction that he does walk, maybe try and find a new team. All right. Next up, a bit of a short one here. Easton Stick, who surprisingly found himself getting extended by the Chargers this last offseason. This is one, I'll be honest with you guys, that I did not see coming, especially considering that the Chargers were going to go out there and draft another quarterback in Max Duggan eventually in the 2023 NFL draft, which is pretty insane. But it feels like the Chargers seem to like him a lot. And I understand, like, Chargers fans, we really only get to see him in action, right? In those preseason games. We don't really get to see the full extent of what he does in practice. It feels like he's offering something to the Chargers that they really value, thus giving him the extension, the one-year extension, this year in 2023. Could it be enough to keep him around going into the future? I think it could be. Again, the Chargers went out there and they paid Chase Daniel to come and mentor Justin Herbert. They found a lot of value in keeping him on the roster. They could feel a similar way with Easton Stick in terms of what he provides, maybe the practice squad, what he provides maybe legitimately as a backup in the NFL. But I feel like again, the biggest thing that's going to push him out if he doesn't stay with the Chargers is going to be money, because backup quarterback is not the most expensive position in the world, but it is a little bit more expensive than other positions you'll find on the roster because it is premium. It's a quarterback, right? This is the quarterback position in the NFL. They're going to have to get paid a little bit. And once again, with the Chargers kind of hands being tied financially going into 2024, that might be enough to push him out, in combination with the fact that the Chargers did just draft another quarterback who can take that QB2 spot, right? And if you're asking me, just kind of, observing what's been going on in minicamp and OTAs especially, it feels like Max Duggan and Easton Stick are extremely comparable. And I feel like Max Duggan will eventually be able to provide the Chargers with everything they want out of QB2 on a much cheaper, price. So that's why I think maybe Easton Stick, if I were to predict, he's probably going to get pushed out next season because of the money. And I think Max Duggan's going to be able to provide almost the same thing in terms of talent, in my opinion, the way you can use him at the QB2 spot. Next up, this one's kind of tricky for me. This is a sticky situation for the player. Jalen Guyton, who was brought back on a one-year deal for the Chargers this season, is already kind of in a situation, right? The Chargers, they went from maybe a little shaky at the position of wide receiver to their cup overfloweth, right? There's now a lot of options at wide receiver, and that already in 2023 is putting him in a situation, right? We got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnson is your top three. Then you got Josh Palmer, who's one of the best wide receiver fours you might find in the league. Then after that, I would say it's Jalen Guyton at wide receiver 5, Darius Davis. But now that you got this other guy, Pokey Wilson, who's in there in training camp, pushing for a roster spot and looking absolutely fantastic doing so. Not to mention that Darius Davis, the round 4 selection for the Chargers this year, could threaten the role of a Jalen Guyton, the speedster, right? If you go follow me on Twitter, because sometimes I refer to it in my videos. Just yesterday, I posted a video that the Chargers had posted of Darius Davis, and I talked about how excited I was to see that speed on display, and it fully explained the difference between a 40 time and in-game play speed, okay? And what we saw in that clip was absolutely incredible. Almost 24 miles an hour. Can we actually go grab that, director? Let's go take a look here. Let's go take a look here. I just posted it. Yeah, right here. Last season, Darius Davis clocked 23.47 miles per hour in a game, the fastest run in all of college football and the NFL. That speed was drafted for a reason. The Chargers, we've kind of had pretty decent speed with Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson in our recent history, but that is pretty next level speed, and I think the Chargers have plans for that. Unfortunately for Jalen Guyton, there's a lot of competition at the wide receiver spot. He also unfortunately was injured this last year. I think the injury was pretty significant. It could threaten his spot on the roster even this season. If I had to guess, I would say he makes the roster this year, and I think he's a contributor, right? But I think he's going to have to make a pretty big impression in order to stay with the Chargers past 2023. So I'm guessing he'll stay with us this year, and I hope that he does. He's been an awesome part of our deep game with Justin Herbert. But again, things start revolving and evolving and changing, and I think Darius Davis is going to step on some toes in terms of that role, and I think he's going to do very well for the Chargers, if I'm being honest. I think Darius Davis could be that sleeper guy that has a bigger role than we are all thinking and predicting going into this season. So Jalen Guyton, I'm going to say, unfortunately, maybe walks after this season. I actually hope that he still makes it this season with the Chargers. All right, next up, let's talk a little bit about that defensive line. Austin Johnson, also on his last year with the Bolts. This one's really tricky again because we didn't get a pretty big sample size with him last year either. Of course, a free agent acquisition for the Chargers in 2022. We were all very excited because of his upside in the run defense. The Chargers definitely needed some help in that category, and it feels like when he was on the field, he was looking pretty decent, right? And unfortunately, after that injury, we just didn't really get to see that full sample size to build that confidence. And I feel like Johnson, the player, has a lot to prove even after last year's injury. Now, I think the Chargers situation in their run defense especially does make me put an asterisk next to the name of Austin Johnson. I feel like a lot depends on how he does this season. Age is certainly not on his side. I think he's 29 now. So next year, going into that season, he'll be 30, and that's really on that edge. I think for the position of defensive tackle, you can afford guys that are maybe a bit older. The Chargers just signed the guy in Nick Williams, who we're actually going to talk about in just a second, who's in his 33rd year. So defensive tackle, you can bring in guys that are a little bit older. I do think that does give Austin Johnson a chance at coming back this next season. I don't think he's going to be especially expensive. And I think a lot does ride on what he does this year. If he goes out there, stays healthy, helps the Chargers improve that abysmal run defense stat, I think there's a decent chance the Chargers decide to bring him back. But a lot depends on how he does this year and if he can stay on the field. So my prediction is he could resign, but it's pending on what happens in 2023. I think you can say that about everybody on this list. I think everybody could fight for a shot to get another, contract. But again, you got to factor in a lot of these things, okay? Especially the money. Austin Johnson, his position, his age. I feel like the Chargers could afford a much cheaper contract for him than, let's say, some of these other guys like Easton Stick, who might be a little bit more expensive, or Gerald Everett, I should say. All right? So Austin Johnson, I think he could be pretty solid. So let's talk about the other guy I referred to here, in Nick Williams. I don't know how much we've talked about him since he was signed by the Chargers. I think a very under-the-radar, solid signing in terms of depth for the Chargers defensive line. 33 years old. In my opinion, I think the Chargers, again, brought him in as a run defender. Maybe he can add a little bit to the pass rush as well. Maybe I'm getting those mixed up. No, I'm pretty sure we got it right. And in my opinion, again, a lot of this is because of the Chargers defensive line having a lot of movement this last season, especially with Brendan Fayoko leaving and Christian Covington, a lot of these guys that we've kind of had as backups. And then, of course, you got kind of these guys still up in the air like Tito, who I'm hoping does come back fully healthy. He was a great run defender. But to me, that kind of tells me what Nick Williams is for the Chargers right now. I feel like he is just kind of a one-year filler, which is okay, right? I think you need those guys every single season. So I will say Nick Williams, for me, will be a walk next year. But again, who knows? At 33, though, going into 34 next season, I think it would be pretty unlikely for the Chargers to bring him back again. All right? Next up, here comes a pretty big name, guys. And again, we've been talking about this the whole video. A lot depends on what happens in 2023 in this season. Do they give them themselves a better shot at getting re-signed? I think they do, but a lot depends on the position as well, man. Let's talk about Josh Kelly. Drafted in the Anthony Lynn days. Of course, Anthony Lynn kind of knows what he's doing when it comes to the running back position. I think we saw a couple of, Band-Aid players go in there. Oh, what was it? Was it Kellen Balaj that was in there for a season too? And he kind of turned him into a pretty decent player, right? I feel like, if anything, Anthony Lynn was doing right. He understood the run game a little bit in terms of talent. And I feel like it took a couple of years for Josh Kelly to kind of turn into that for the Chargers. But eventually he got there. And Josh Kelly, to me, is one of those stories where a lot of people are doubting him. And I think it's because he's not getting enough reps. He's not getting enough anything. And finally, when the opportunity came knocking for the Chargers RB2 position behind an Austin Eckler, he really did answer the call last season. Now, what happens beyond that? What happened? Let's say he does have a pretty stellar 2023 season. What happens beyond that? Well, first off, I think a lot depends on what happens this year. I think he's once again going to be given the opportunity to shine as the Chargers RB2, which I think is a position that the Chargers take very seriously. I think RB2 is something that the Chargers are trying to pay a lot of attention to, right? But outside of that, I think he'll look solid. I think he's going to do similar things this year. He might even improve this year. And that's something the Chargers need to see with the whole situation at running back happening next season, which, again, we'll delve into in just a minute. The biggest question is, will the Chargers pay the running back position? The Chargers, who have been very stubborn in not paying running back, in not paying middle linebacker, in not paying certain positions, are they going to break that trend for Josh Kelly? I think it's a mixed answer. I think yes and no. I think the Chargers will offer him something. It'll be low. It'll be very low. I think it'll be so low, in fact, that I think Josh Kelly might have a better opportunity and maybe with another team as a backup. I don't know. It feels that way with everybody right now, right? All of these running backs out there, big names like Leonard Fournette, right? Ezekiel Elliott. These big names can't get a job in the NFL because of the position they're playing. And unfortunately for Josh Kelly, I think the Chargers are going to be pretty big contenders in terms of bringing in fresh running back talent over the next couple of seasons. And it's not all just because of the position he plays. I think that plays a big factor. But I also think it's because we have made a pretty big shift this last year. One so dramatic that I think it would be appropriate for the Chargers to maybe try and, start off with a clean slate next season in terms of, let's say, RB2. And that was bringing in a new offensive coordinator that does have some repertoire behind his name, and Kellen Moore. And if you guys know anything about Kellen Moore's system with the Dallas Cowboys, it's that he disguises his offense so well as a aggressive passing attack that you almost forget how good their run offense is as well. And I think in order to meet that standard, they may need a certain archetype of running back, a certain formula of running back in that offense to make that work. I think Josh Kelly and Austin Eckler are that formula this season. I don't know if they're going to have that next season. And I think that may force the Chargers to make some decisions. So I'm going to say, again, heavily based on the fact that he's a running back, and unfortunately they just do not get paid. And the Chargers money situation, I'm going to have to say walk. It just doesn't feel very likely. But I do hope that the Chargers and Josh Kelly find some middle ground, especially if he has a really good 2023, where we can keep this young guy on the roster for a few more seasons, especially if it's just as an RB2, right? I don't know if I see him as an RB1, maybe, but I think as an RB2, he's definitely proven to be pretty solid. So we'll have to wait and see, man. We'll have to wait and see. And if anything, again, the options are just going to make the Chargers' heads explode, right? You've got some of the best veterans I've ever seen stacked on top of each other in free agency. You've got some very decent rookies coming in this year, as well as, again, next season. It's going to be tough for guys like Josh Kelly to keep their positions on any roster. So good luck to Josh Kelly. I hope he has a great season this year, though. Next up, probably one of the biggest names outside of the last guy we'll talk about on this entire list. Let's talk a little bit about Vato, our guy, Michael Davis, who a lot of us had our doubts about last season, right? I would say at least the season before that, too, when Brandon Staley first started implementing his new defensive system. It was players like Michael Davis that were really struggling to keep up with all of the change. It was guys like Michael Davis that didn't seem like a scheme fit. And it was guys like Michael Davis that really dropped the ball in that first season with Brandon Staley. And I think a lot of us were like, oh no, we just extended this man. What's going to happen? Well, surprisingly, unfortunately for Vato and Chargers fans, it seems like he clicked the season following, right? The season following, Michael Davis goes out there, puts up, I would say, one of the best seasons of his entire career. And he shows that he could be a very integral piece to this Brandon Staley defense, especially with the kind of skill set that he brings to the NFL in terms of attributes, right? 6'2", very fast for the position. There's a lot of weapons in the NFL nowadays that are fast, big targets, and Michael Davis is a very good counter to those weapons, right? I'm trying to think within our division guys that he could counter. Cortland Sutton is someone that I would trust him to cover with the Chiefs. Not so much anymore. Valdez Scantling, right? 6'4", very fast. That's a guy I would trust him to cover. And then with the Raiders, maybe not Devontae Adams, but you guys are getting my point here, right? I feel like Michael Davis has a role with this team, and I think he's expanding in terms of the value he brings to the NFL because of those physical attributes on top of what is growing into very good coverage instincts, right? So I like Michael Davis a lot. The narrative behind him, I do appreciate. It's one that I hope to see again with J.C. Jackson, where, maybe the overcomplicated defensive system was a little too much for him to grasp in his first year, but he put in the work. He comes back the year after that and really puts on a show. I think there's a good shot that the Chargers like him enough to keep him around on another extension that, again, is not going to be too expensive, right? The things that are working against him, though, I think the biggest one's going to be he'll be 29 going into the 2024 season, right? So age is certainly going to play some factor there. Do the Chargers want to pay a 29 going on 30 corner in the NFL? Probably not, but I do also feel like his talent speaks for him in terms of being that exception. So if he has another great year in the Staley system, I think he could be back on a 1 or 2 year deal. And I do predict Michael Davis to have a pretty stellar season this year once again. So if I were to predict, I would say the Chargers do re-sign a Michael Davis even if it's just a couple of seasons. That last year in his 20s, and then maybe his year 30 or his age 30 season as well. But again, he's really been growing into this system, and that's something I think Brandon Staley's going to find a lot of value in. All right. So going from Vato, let's hit up Will Clapp next, the best meme name in all of the NFL. Will Clapp. How could we possibly let this guy walk? Well, for me, how do I explain this, man? Clapp feels like a very solid backup option, right? I feel like he found that role with the New Orleans Saints before being signed by the Chargers. He's only 27 years old. He's meshed really well, especially with some of the backups out there. I feel like when we've called on him, he hasn't been the worst offensive lineman I've seen in terms of backups, but I also feel like, again, there's some chemistry out there that the Chargers are trying to protect. Unless the Chargers draft a backup center, I think he could end up staying on the cheap. That's the kind of player that you're talking about with Will Clapp. And again, it's one that doesn't affect this situation as bad. So I'll go ahead and say, yeah, I think Will Clapp could stay with the team on a very, very cheap deal. Again, it's one of those up in the air, though. If the Chargers decide to draft a center or maybe even sign somebody cheaper, which would be very cheap, it could happen. But I'll just go ahead and say, Will Clapp stays with the Chargers. Next up, another big name. Another big name again, especially considering what could happen in 2023. We got to talk about Alohi Gilman before we close out with the biggest name on this list. Alohi Gilman. Very tricky. Very, very tricky. Sorry, guys. I apologize. The allergy season's here in force. Neighbors are mowing the lawn. It's getting crazy out here. So let's talk about Alohi Gilman. This is a very tricky situation, right? Not just because I like the player, not just because he's been pretty solid, not just because of his role, but like it's everything put together, right? It's so many different factors put together. And I think the biggest one for me depends on his role, right? I feel like when I look at Alohi Gilman, especially this last season, I'll say the second half of the year, he was pretty dang good, in my opinion, right? I think he was so under the radar. People missed how vital that he was to the Chargers' success in the second half of the season. He was actually pretty dang good out there in coverage. And when I talk about role for Alohi Gilman, there's a place that I feel like he fits on this roster specifically that brings a lot of value to the Chargers in this system. And that serves as the Derwin relief role player, right? So when you take a look at the Chargers defense, right, and the way that it's been constructed, and some of the most vital and important pieces to this defense especially is the ability to move around Derwin James. He is that big piece of the defense that keeps, opposing offenses on their toes. Very unpredictable. He can play anywhere on the field, star or nickel corner, edge even. He can play up top. He can play corner. He can play whatever. And that is something that the Chargers have really kind of grown reliant on. They need that hybrid safety to move around. But when Derwin moves around, you're going to need a guy out there that can play at his position in lieu of him moving, let's say, to the box, right? And that's where I really feel like Alohi has shined, in my opinion. He's been a great relief role player for Derwin James, which puts him on the field, let's be honest, quite a bit. Derwin plays, coverage up top. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I would say maybe half the time, maybe less. I don't know. They move him around a lot, and I mean a lot. And that puts Alohi's responsibilities, pretty firmly at that position where the Chargers need to trust him. And I feel like this season, he could prove that value even more because of the situation they might be putting him in once again. This season, it feels like he could play free safety. Now, let's be honest. I think a lot of us are hoping to see John Johnson get signed. There was just a post by Sebastian Joseph Day and Morgan Fox with John Johnson. Johnson was wearing a LA football shirt. A lot of people got excited about that. I think that is legitimate recruiting. I think there's a legitimate chance that John Johnson still comes to the team. If not, though, and even if he does, we could see Alohi playing a lot of free safety, the opposite safety of Derwin James this season. And that's even more responsibility for Alohi. Do I think he's up to it? I actually really legitimately do think he is up to it. And even if the Chargers sign John Johnson, I feel like Alohi still has a lot of responsibility in that Derwin relief role. We have to remember how much we move Derwin around. We need a guy like Alohi. And I think even going into the future, let's say the Chargers draft a guy in the third round to play free safety or in the second round to play free safety, and Alohi is still looking for that extension with the Chargers. I think he could still get it on the cheap, right? Again, that position, that backup role, I don't know if he's going to command too much money in free agency. I don't know how much it's going to impact this situation. But I think Alohi could remain with the Chargers despite whatever happens, because that relief role is so unique to the Chargers, and it's one that I think he does very well. I would hope to see him back. So I'm going to say prediction, he is back with the Chargers after this year. All right. Finally, let's close out this video with the big obvious one, the one that everyone's like, director, why are we doing this? Why are we building up the drama? We all know that we're here to watch this video because we need to know what your thoughts are on Austin Ekeler beyond 2023. Okay? Now, if you guys were living under a rock and you didn't know, there's a bit of drama behind the Austin Ekeler situation this last offseason. Austin Ekeler was threatening to leave because he wanted more money, because this man scored like 40 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. Understandable. The dude's a fantasy god. He wants to make sure his paycheck reflects that. Unfortunately, just like we were talking with Joshua Kelly, the NFL, the Chargers, the sport of professional football does not value running back in terms of dollars and cents because of how interchangeable they can be. Austin Ekeler, how interchangeable is he? Not very, in my opinion. Very unique player here, one that brings a lot of uniqueness to your offense that you have been heavily leaning on the last couple of seasons, and it has been working. Is that something worth keeping around, even at a position that you normally do not pay? Yes, absolutely, in my opinion. If the Chargers can figure out the money situation with Austin Ekeler, if it's not putting too big of a dent against the dead cap, and the Chargers can make everything work despite the money situation, I would really hope that they keep Austin Ekeler going in past next season. The problem is, Austin Ekeler, he would be what, age 29, right? Is he 29 now? I think he would go into his age 29 season next year. For a running back that's like 70 years old, right? And unfortunately, that's just like, it's the signal of the end of times for the position, right? You're going to hit a wall eventually. And that's why teams typically don't pay the position that much. There's a reason why Derrick Henry, perhaps the best running back in the league, is being rumored to get traded because the Titans paid him too much. And he's hitting those years, man. He's getting close to 30. And even though he's so great, and he was great last year, that wall could be hit at any time, including this upcoming season. And that's unfortunately just the reality of the position of running back in the NFL. So for me, it feels like at age 29, it would be a stretch for me, at least, for the Chargers to extend him, especially with the numbers that I'm sure are in his mind that he is worth. I absolutely think he is worth that. I think it's just unfortunate for him and the rest of the running backs in the league that the league views that position in a certain way financially. I really hope I'm wrong, and the Chargers figure out a way, and Austin Ekeler figures out a way, and we can keep that part of the offense going forward. But I would expect the Chargers to be heavy contenders in the draft next season for a running back. And again, like I said with Joshua Kelly, they're going to be forming this new identity as a run team because of, again, the bringing on of a Kellen Moore. That's such a huge deal, guys. And the Chargers, while they have him under contract, because he could be called to be a head coach for another team any day, including us maybe even, who knows. While we have him, the Chargers are going to want to use him to create something here. And I think one of the biggest reasons under the radar that they brought Kellen Moore in was to fix our run game. As amazing as Austin Ekeler has been, the Chargers' ground game has been abysmal. And I think that's something the Chargers really want to fix. And it may dictate it's better for them to start fresh with running backs from the draft, or maybe even free agency that better fit their vision, than it does trying to extend guys like Josh Kelly or Austin Ekeler, who may not make financial sense for the team past 2023. So you guys in the comment section, let me know what you think of all of these options. Again, every single one of these guys, it's their last season in terms of contract with the Chargers. Who do we bring back? Who do we let walk? Is there anybody here you guys disagree with me with in terms of bringing back or letting walk? Let me know in the comment section below. More importantly, too, I really want to know your guys' thoughts on the Austin Ekeler thing. What are your thoughts? Do we keep him? Is there any shot? I would more appropriately say, do you guys feel there's any shot that the Chargers bring him back at age 29 to continue playing running back for the team? Because it would be a really tough one for me to want to part ways with in Austin Ekeler. So you guys let me know. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you like what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Take a look at the tight end draft of 2024, guys. It's actually pretty mind-blowing.